Well, this is Dave Gaddis, and this is February 3rd, 2015, and we're interviewing Connie Cooper in her office here in North Dallas. And so welcome, Connie. Glad you could join us.
Thank you. Almost downtown Dallas.
Oh, okay. Well, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us when and where you were born?
I'm an Air Force brat.
Okay.
So I was born in my, well, it was Warner Robins, which is right outside of Macon. My parents were from Macon and Atlanta. And it just so happened that my mother was at my dad's home when the event started. And so we went to the base, and I was born in Warner Robins, Georgia.
Okay.
Back in 1951, do I say that?
And I assume, being an Air Force brat, you moved around quite a bit as a child?
We did, particularly with Strategic Air Command.
Oh,
and that was a little different because I know a number of people still remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and Bay of Pigs and Russia and all that. And so we had an experience because we lived on base. And which really, I gave a speech a long time ago for the military division, and I realized I lived in a planned community. But anyway, we lived on the base, and we went to town schools. Well, we had two major events at that point that were very emblematic of conflict between town and the base. One was when Castro had the missiles aimed for Strategic Air Command bases. We were one of those bases that they weren't. So the town was most upset that their city was, targeted. And the other was integration. And because all the kids from the base went to town schools, well, the black students went to the black elementary and school. But with integration, everyone was to go to the same schools. And so the town didn't like that, and I know that I'm digressing a bit here, but it gives a little perspective of growing up. The town didn't like that, and because they were not ready. It was in Mississippi, Columbus, Mississippi. Good people, but it was different. It wasn't how things had been. And they said base kids will no longer be able to go to school at the city schools. And so we stayed out of school for almost 2 months. And some people rented a house in town and stuff like that. But the base commander said, we will show you the impact of military bases on the community. You will no longer shop in Columbus, Mississippi. In about a week, the financial impact it had on the city, they said, oh, okay, y'all can go back to school. So it's an interesting relationship military bases have with their, if you will, sister cities, the communities in which they're adjacent to.
So what were some of the bases that you were?
We were in Columbus, Mississippi, Columbus Air Force Base, 3 bases in Germany. For some reason, and that was in the late 50s, and so, mid 50s. So things in Germany, they were just rebuilding from the war. And we ended up moving around each year there. And we lived in Austin, Texas. Never knew that I'd be back in Texas again in my kindergarten through 2nd grade. And then my father was TDY in Greenland for over a year, which nowadays it's bizarre. So we lived in Atlanta. And then one year we lived in Bermuda. And that was an experience because you couldn't drive. Only people that had been there 6 months could actually apply for a driver's license, and they only allowed 1 car per family. So, but that's about it because we stayed a little longer at a lot of the places, and then we came back to Columbus after Bermuda. So we didn't move quite as much as some military families do. So
my wife is an Air Force brat, and she's SAC.
Oh, okay. Well, we're the elite. No, it is a different mindset.
But she ended up off at Omaha, Nebraska, Bellevue, Nebraska.
Okay. Well, I do remember my mother saying she went. It wasn't. I don't think it was Nebraska. It may have been Omaha. And she said she put her laundry out on the line, and she went back, and her sheets were three streets down, from the wind. And she said, what have I done here? I want to go home.
So with all that moving around, where did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from Columbus, Mississippi,
Okay.
SD Lee High School, and it's kind of interesting. We're sort of of having another. I'm sort of, for some reason, I'm kind of one of the organizers for our reunion every 5 years. And so Columbus, Mississippi, SD Lee High School, Southern General. And then I went 2 years to Mississippi State. Okay. And I had one of those issues where I like to enjoy life more than I like to attend class. And at some point I said, I must have been ADD, or I am, I don't know, but I said I need less of a distraction. So I actually voluntarily decided to go to MSCW, which was Mississippi College for Women. And they're in my hometown of Columbus, all female. And my grades, from that point on, I actually ended up graduating, and I went back to Mississippi State for graduation.
Okay.
And
what did you end up getting your degree in?
Well, it was political science. I actually looked and saw that I could avoid statistics. And I didn't like statistics, and for some reason political science didn't require statistics. But one of my last professors in political science happened to be a former, I don't know if he was actually called planning director for Nashville-Davidson, the joint city-county in Tennessee. And he was an inspiration. But what was interesting, he was also my swim coach when I was growing up in high school. So, Carl Butler.
I was going to say, what was his name?
Carl Butler. Okay. And it's funny where you never think when you're doing laps that this person will suddenly be your inspiration for the rest of your life. And but he, and I think that's one of the problems with city planning, community planning, urban planning, whatever you call it, regional planning. I don't think there's a real consciousness of really what it is. And there's so many, and we've singing to the choir here, but many of us stumble into the profession, and I think it's obviously much more prominent now. I mean, urban renewal but that was sort of the ugly part of planning. Although consultants made a bunch on urban renewal contracts, but they did. It was funny, from about 65 to 75, it was gravy for them. But when he talked about because I loved history and I loved politics. But I loved also, and I think so many of planners always talk about how they like to look at a map, and I loved looking at maps, and so that was sort of a marriage where he could explain how, the geography met the politics and how, so that he influenced me.
And what year did you graduate?
1973.
Okay, and then you went to do what?
Well, I went to Little Rock, Arkansas. I ran away from home at the age of my 21st birthday. My brother gave me his 66 Mustang. I crawled out the window and ran away to Little Rock, Arkansas. I knew one person in Arkansas. It was not Chris McGettrick. I went and manufactured detonators for Baldwin Electronics and lived in Mrs. Weinminster's house for working women. Sometime later I found out it was actually, the ladies there were a bit of a ring for the VFW club, if you know what I mean. But I had no idea. It was $8 a week and furnished and everything. I was going to be in history. Was getting my master's in history. I cannot recall now how I took a right-hand turn and decided to go to Ole Miss in their planning school. Well, I may have. Well, there is a story there. I talked about planning, and I wanted to go to Georgia Tech, and I applied to Georgia Tech's planning program. And Malcolm Little, he's sort of like, the god of planning for Georgia Tech. He was there for probably 40 or 50 years. I don't know how long. He didn't like women. And he, in fact, said women have no place in urban planning, And so he did accept. In fact, one of my first bosses was the first female graduate of Theo Richter, I believe, was one of the first female graduates of Georgia Tech. But I interviewed, and he was so discouraging and, put off. And at that point, I was not as, outspoken as I am now, and so I said, okay, I don't want to go somewhere I'm not wanted, and I ended up applying to Ole Miss, which is in Oxford, Mississippi, in the urban planning program. But I can tell you, it was an interesting thing. My mother lived in Atlanta, And every time when I became president of the American Planning Association or distinguished this or that, unbeknownst to me, she would pay Malcolm Little a visit. And she would say, this could have been one of your students. Who knows how things turn. So,
interestingly, you're not the first one to tell us that story about Malcolm Little.
Well, see, I do not lie. That was graduated from Ole Miss in '75.
Who's your advisor and major professor?
Oh, I should have known. It's Mr. Cook was in Hosey Hearn, and there was one other gentleman that's still around that I'm glad I've forgotten his name. But it wasn't a large program. It was almost like, in some ways, a lot what Kansas State had at times, a very small program. So that was, that year. I finished in about a year and a half, and graduated in '75. And I had a choice. We got 6 credits for an internship, and I had a choice because at that time, a good friend of mine had been a maid at Yellowstone. Now, that doesn't sound glamorous, but that is a highly competitive job. And I had applied for that really, really late. At the same time, I'd applied at Alabama Department of ADO, Alabama Development Office, for an internship. And I got notice that I had been accepted at both places. I wonder today if my life would have been any different, if I'd not ended up in Alabama as long as I had. But I took the ADO, I did what a good daughter should do, and took the internship down in Montgomery, Alabama, with the Alabama Development Office, instead of being a maid at Yellowstone. But well, that wasn't a permanent job. That was just the summer where they hired a lot of college kids and had a lot of fun.
Do you remember some of the things you did at ADO?
Well, it was interesting. I was there 3 months, and had one of the first times, I'd really had an opportunity to meet someone from India, and Shabir Olya was my office mate, if you will. And we were doing, and I've still got the studies somewhere, a study of land use and geology and things across the state. And mind you, back in '75, that was, almost you had to go to you had to go to the archives and the maps and stuff. You didn't do the internet search and stuff. But we created a whole series, and that was really what I did for my internship, a whole series of water, and I think it was the conservation, ecology, and mining and stuff. And so that was it was nice, because most of the time, a lot of times they don't know what to do with interns. And we actually produced something that, you had to go to the printer and stuff. So, it was a very laborious process. You didn't have word processing. And so.
Well, you didn't have any graphic computer programs either.
So no. You had to go talk someone down in the drafting area to that this is really important. And at that point, even when I took a job up in Birmingham, you created maps through burning plates and layering and making sure, so if each color was a different metal plate or so that you burned, and if it didn't register, you got to do it all over again. But I was there for 3 months, and then I had an offer to go to Birmingham, for my first real position. And it was interesting. I'd been in Montgomery, and I'd been in Columbus, Mississippi, and Starkville, and those are kind of lazy, not very dynamic communities. Montgomery's really changed since that time. But I remember when I got to Birmingham the first time, and I went, oh my God, this is how. This is life, because at that time, and it still is, it was so vibrant compared to Montgomery, which I think is very, very typical of state capitals. But so that was my first job was in '75 as a Planner 1 in the Community Development Office. And we were funded, we were a consortium of we were urban counties. This was, the urban renewal program was dead and the CDBG program was alive and well. Well, Birmingham could get funding, and but if you were an urban county, you could create a consortium of smaller cities and the unincorporated area and create an urban county, and so we were funded through that. So I remember my first it was a land use report for, I think it was actually a community facilities report for Jefferson County, which has 1,100 square miles in one county, which is very large compared to the smaller counties in Mississippi and Georgia. And I remember I gave that report to the director there, not of our division, and I got the report back and it had one mark on it. And I looked at him and I said, "You didn't read this, did you?" And he said, "Well, I scanned it." And I said, "I'm never going to be any better if you don't show me what needs improvement." And I can remember someone said, "Well, God, you should have been lucky. You didn't have to rewrite it." Of course, that was when you had to, hand it to a secretary to type and all that. But I remember very emphatically, very, very upset at him that he didn't spend the time help me grow, and so. But that was my first.
So how long did you stay in Birmingham?
I was in Birmingham from 1975 to 2002, and I ended up in '87 taking a position I was at Jefferson County, which is where Birmingham's located, and the Collin County of Alabama is Shelby County, where growth moved. And I took that position as planning director, and for 3 years. And the interesting part about that, I was one of the few planners in the nation that actually had an employment contract. It was not unusual for city managers to have an employment contract, but highly unusual for planning directors too. And I remember I borrowed the city managers association, a sample contract, and it came in handy because 3 years later, it was put to use when at one point I had...
Well, maybe we ought to go back a little bit.
Oh.
At some point in time you got involved in AIP?
It was, actually, it was AIP when I got out of, when I started, I was actually a student member of AIP. Okay. And not of ASPA, but AIP, and, through my, school years. Ole Miss? Yeah, at Ole Miss, which was, I guess it was 74 and 75. Sure. And then once you were out working, you could join, you became full member. And so I really, my first national conference was DC in, I think it was actually 1976. I think of this, and all that. So I was active in my chapter, and I think chapters really nurture future leadership nationally. And so I went, I was, secretary, and my big claim to fame was being able to hold conferences that made money, but that were still economical for the membership to attend. And but I do remember I was going to run for president of the chapter, and I remember a person coming forward and saying, Connie, we've already had one female be president of the chapter. I think it's time we have another male. And, and at that point, I was pretty agreeable, I said, whatever. But later on, I ended up, I think what got me interested in APA was later on I was chapter president, I was serving in some other capacity in our chapter, and our president couldn't go to the conference in Boston in probably 1981. And so I went and I sat through the chapter president's council and meeting, and I I can remember, and I think I want to be sure I talk about mentorship. I think it's
We'll have a chance.
yeah,
but,
yeah. But that got got me. Where this was so much. The whole spirit of people nationally are doing things. This whole group of more of us that I'm experiencing. In Alabama, we only had 140 members.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think they still only have 140 or so. They may have 100 and 200 by now. But it was an experience to meet all these city planners and talk and stuff. So that was in the early 80s.
Do you remember when you became a full member of AIP? Did you take an oral exam or written
No, I
exam,
took a written exam.
Okay.
And I remember it was the exam, I'd like to say the reason was it was the same year I went to Hawaii and then took the exam the next week. I've always said I failed the exam the first time. And so I always tell people, I've been president or whatever, and I didn't pass it the first time. It's, it's not, a scarlet letter you have here. It just didn't work. But I remember the next time I felt a little more pressure to pass it. But I became a full member of, it was in '83.
Okay.
So, it was I think in '83 when I got the word that I'd passed. And
So you went to the Boston conference in '81. By the way, that was my first conference.
was it? We could have met,
But that got your idea of running again for chapter president. So did you run immediately?
I did, and it really, we think about it. It seems like I did immediately. I was real active in organizing things, so with chapter events and all. And when you have a small chapter, it's and it's only about 15% of the people that volunteer to do things anyway. And you have a small chapter, that's about 20 people. But so I ran for president and then went to the meeting. I think it may have been Minneapolis or St. Louis. It was a mid-year meeting and where I first served and as president. And somehow Jim Duncan he had to step down because I think he was going to run for something nationally or something, but somehow he stepped down so that seat became vacant or so, or I can't even remember if Al Raby or Jim Duncan which one was president at the time, but Al Raby, maybe it's just all of our accents. Al was from Tennessee, so maybe, but so he was very instrumental in putting my name up for chair of the Chapter President's Council.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think. Jim can tell me. I can't remember if I ran against Jim Duncan or he stepped down. I don't remember. But nonetheless,
Do you remember some of the other people that were on CPC at the time?
Yes, that was at the time I met Craig Farmer. And I'm trying to remember if Frank Turner is someone I met at that point or a little bit later. Carol Barrett, I think, was in Maryland or Delaware, or one of those states up there. And I met her, and the woman who really was a real inspiration, I can't think of her last name, the chapter awards is named after Karen
Smith?
Karen Smith. Who was tragically killed
In Colorado?
Yeah. She was real active. She was on the board, I think, at that point. And Frank Ween out in California, my best and dearest friend Angela Harper up in Virginia, Richard Codd in New Jersey, Sarah Jane White, and later on I met Jeff Table and Phyllis in Plano, and so it was kind of interesting. So when I came here, there are a lot of people that I knew from back when, and
were there any particular hot issues at CPC when you were on there?
Oh yeah. We our nemesis for so many years has been Dan Lorber, and he's from Chicago, and he's the former president of AICP, and I don't know if he was president of ASPO or not. He was real active in ASPO, and he was also president of APA. Well, the whole big issue, one of the huge issues was whether or not the board at that time had all the members of AICP and APA on it. And so it was a board of like 23 people. And so his huge issue was to narrow that down. And I always say my claim to fame is that I was the last voting member of the Chapter President's Council, because now they are just advisory. But then the chair of the Chapter President's Council, the divisions and students, all three of us had votes. But
there's been discussion recently about giving the vote back to.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
We'll see how that
yeah,
goes.
yeah, and of course, so that was hugely controversial, and we argued very. I can understand how the vote to reduce the board. I understand how it's helpful. That we don't need the whole AICP commission on the board and stuff. But some of the reasons why, were challenging. It didn't save APA any money, but it was extreme. It was ugly, because there were factions, and Dan seemed to lead that, and so of course he was I think the only person that I have ever known that's actually been sanctioned by AICP for ethics violations, but or certainly the only person that stature of APA-AICP that has. But I think it was very controversial, and we had. It was one of the things, and it's hard to tout your own horn at times, but I think it's important. CPC, the Chapter President's Council, at that point, they met twice a year, and then they went away. When I became chair, I found an opportunity to try to keep people connected. And we ate together, and we, partied together, and we made decisions together. And one of the things we recognized is each chapter gave a segment of their funds to fund the Chapter President's Council. Well, what we discovered when I went up to Chicago with Dan Bird, who's from Indiana, a chapter president from there, and he and I sat through the books, and we found out, regardless of what the balance was at the end of the year, the organization zeroed out the money and kept it. And that is the genesis of the chapter grant program. They owed the chapter presidents, and in fact we started keeping our own money after that. We had a bank account and everything else, but we had money to work with. But that's what funded. We said we want that money back, and so I think it was about $60,000 or so. It may have been $300. Who knows what the memory is here, but it was significant money that could roll into chapter grants each year to fund things that chapters wanted to do. So that was interesting.
Do you remember who the executive director was at the time?
Yes, Iz Stolman.
Okay.
Iz Stolman, and is when I was chair of the Chapter President's Council and on the board, APA board, until 1987, and then I was past. Well, then in 19. I'm trying to remember. The person will remain unnamed, but they didn't suggest I was. It was a Texas person. They suggested I wasn't ready to put my name in for APA president, that I should serve as a regional director first. And I told that person, I said, well, you didn't have to do that. Why should I have to do that, But fortunately, I had some very good friends on the nominating committee that sort of reduced that view on the nominating committee to one that wasn't the majority. And I got nominated to be, run for APA president. Prior to that, I think at one point, it's funny how Mary Lou Henry and I were running at the same time for APA president. She at one time, and I can remember I saw her down in Miami, and she had the neatest little sort of favorite out at everybody's table, and I thought, I'll never win over her. Of course, she said, well, Connie, all you know how to do is give a good party. And I said, well, you know, but there was a little more than that. But when she said that, I started professor. He's a professor at A&M.
Speaking of David Pugh.
David Pugh. I thought it'd be a good idea in San Antonio to have a party. And I said, David, you know, I think we can do that. So I took him to the Hyatt to convince the Hyatt that we could have their dining room area space to have a party. And I remember David said, you know, the guy didn't have any choice. He might as well just have said yes at the front end. And he said before we left there, Connie had talked him into food, and, you know, all we had to pay for was the liquor, you know. But that was the start of the chapter president's party. And because I felt like New York had done a party at the conference the year before in '87. And it was such a wonderful way for people from camaraderie, you know, and I thought that would be a great way for us to keep everyone together. And so I created a list of all past chapter presidents, and for probably about 10 years, I would hand mail everybody a notice out. And Rosemary Jones, who was the executive director for AICP, she was a jewel. Nobody would help me, but Rosemary said, Connie, don't worry, I've got the list. And so she got my mailing list. You know, again, that was before everybody's email and stuff like that.
So let's take you on up to you were elected president, and what happened in Shelby County?
You know, it's funny how things turn around. They had been trying for some time to get me. When I first came to work at Shelby County, there were 5 commissioners. Then there were 7. You know, I only had to count to 3, as they say. Then there were 7. I only had to count to 4. You know, and then there was 9. I couldn't count that many. But the chair of the commission was also a land developer, and he wanted his business partner to basically have all my contracts. And we had been at war what's interesting, he had been the person who hired me. And, but the best friend I ever had was the county attorney, who was also the state senator. And he made sure my contract was what it needed to be, my employment contract. Well, that came in handy about 3 years later. There's another backstory 2 years later, but we don't have enough time for that. But 3 years, they finally had the votes to fire me. And I remember he called me in his office, and it was at 4th of July, right before 4th of July weekend. And he said, Connie, he said, you know, if you go quietly, we'll pay your severance. And, you know, we won't say anything, just resign. And, you know, well, I knew if I did that, my staff would be at risk, because there was discussion about having his business partner run our department or contract out planning totally. And I knew that I couldn't do that to the folks that I had worked with so long, nor could I do it to the people of Shelby County, because there was a lot of work we did there in the 3 years, and particularly with the development community. I had one of the few times where we increased fees, and I had the development community come to the meeting in support of them, you know. So, but he said, if you'll just resign quietly, you know, everything will be fine. And I said, no, I can't do that. And he said, by the way, how'd that election turn out? And I said, I hadn't heard yet. And I think he thought I'd lost. So we were coming back from the coast that weekend, and there was a big notice in the paper, Shelby County votes to fire a planning director. Well, a good friend of mine in Shelby County, Memphis, Tennessee, is the same one, and they said, oh my God, it's somebody, you know. But that was the vote, you know, that was going to be suddenly on the agenda for Monday's meeting. Well, the Home Builders Association of Birmingham, Greater Birmingham, actually passed a resolution in opposition. They'd gotten wind. They met on a Sunday to pass this resolution. And so when I got there at the commission meeting, they had me come in. They said, "Well, we're going to go in executive session." I said, "No, we're not." I said, "I've talked with counsel, and I said, I have a right for anything that you need to say to be aired publicly." And it was interesting. The news was there. I was so glad I had wonderful people say wonderful things about planning and what we had done. And I remember one person said, "You know, a lot of times I didn't like what she said when I'd come in there and talk with her about it." He said, "But I knew the person that came in behind me would get the same answer if they had the same story." He said, she treated everyone fairly. You may not like the answer, but you got the same, it was fair. And they voted to fire me. Well, shortly, an hour later, I was down in HR, settling things up, and my guy that works for me, I can't believe I've forgotten his name. Todd, for perpetuity here, came in the commission meeting and said, "I'm looking for Connie. What do you need her for?" And someone finally said from the front of the commission table, "Who are you looking for?" And said, "Well, Connie." And says, "Well, we've just terminated her. What did you need to tell her?" "Well, I just wanted to tell her that she got elected president of APA." So the headlines was, Shelby County fires planning, the APA, incoming APA president.
So after Shelby County, where'd you go to work?
Work for myself. Oh, by the way, just a sidebar here. APA decided to do an article on me about the firing. And, mind you, I was coming in, I was president-elect, and Sylvia Lewis, who's the magazine editor and all for APA, wanted to do an article on, the whole issue. And so a wonderful, and this is one of the things nobody could believe, the newspapers loved me, because there'd been a lot of things, newspapers, they never get it right. Well, I've always felt like they get it pretty close. And two news writers for the Birmingham News and their Shelby County affiliate did the article. And I remember I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and fixing to speak, and I got cold feet. I thought, here I am coming in as president, and the story is I got fired, and how is that going to reflect on my presidency? And I remember right before I was doing the keynote speech, I was in my hotel room talking to Sylvia, and we were talking. I said, I'm just don't know. We're into the whatever they call the blue lines or whatever at that point with the article. And I said, "Okay, Sylvia, after you read it, am I a winner or a loser? Just tell me." She says, "You're a winner." I said, "Go with it." I can't tell you the number of people later on would come up to me. I had no idea who they were, and they would say, "I read that article, and I thought, if it's okay for the president of APA to be fired, it's okay. I shouldn't look at it as something, a failure on my part. It's okay." And so it's interesting, where you finally talk about something publicly and you're scared it might have a negative repercussion, and it was hugely positive. So that was.
So you started your consulting firm
Yep.
at that time?
Made no money while I was president of APA. I think I made $12,000 the first year. Thank God I was married. And I think I did, closure plans for sanitary landfills or whatever. But from the first, I think I was president. I got elected I served 91, 92 or so, and 90, 92, 93. Came past president 94 in San Francisco. I came off the board as past president. So I've been doing consulting work the whole time, and since 1990. And as someone said, "Yeah, Connie, they finally kicked you out of the nest, out of that cushy public sector job you have, into the private world where you have to fend for yourself." And
what point in time did you move your practice from to Texas?
In 2002, I left a 25-year marriage and fell in love with Brian Klein, and we, he lived in Grapevine, and I told him, no disrespect for those folks out there where the trees don't grow very tall, but I said, I have to live somewhere in town where there's bigger trees and less prairie, and it looks a little like where I was. I know it's different, but so that was 2002, and still, what was nice about being a consultant, and I worked nationally, so it was very transportable, and so it wasn't like I had to make a decision to leave the county or so. And
what are some of the projects you've done as a consultant that you're particularly proud of?
Well, the work that I did a lot in Georgia, I partnered with Bill Ross, and partnerships are good. It wasn't a formal partnership. It was like both of us go after jobs. But I did a lot of work in Georgia, and a lot of it doing their growth management initiatives out in a lot of county work, and a lot of work in areas around Atlanta, and working then for smaller towns and some larger counties, and Columbia. I probably should get out my resume to remind me what I did. Columbia County, Georgia, where we really created more of a growth management sort of thing, where we began to use nomenclature such as urban residential and, suburban residential, not R1 or R2 or so for zoning and all. And I think that was quite significant. The work we did in with capital improvements programming. One of the things Georgia talks about is a 5-year plan. That you do your comp plans, and then you do your 5-year plan, and so it begins to tie improvements to that. We created a good friend of it was Chris McGettrick in Little Rock, Arkansas, Greg Dale in Cincinnati, Ohio, Eric Kelly in Muncie, Indiana. He may have been elsewhere. I think he may have been up in Iowa at that time. And myself, we was really Greg, Chris, and myself. It was right after the 1992 APA conference in Chicago. We formed the Burnham Group, because we knew we all three had consulting firms, but we needed an umbrella, and we called it the Burnham Group. And our tagline was continuing 100 years of planning. And so that group of us, we ended up with, it didn't last a long time, probably about 4 or 5 years, but it was kind of really I think it was the genesis of a lot of firms you see now that have, I think Bob Barber and
the Orion Group.
Yeah, the Orion Group. But it was an umbrella, because when you're trying to market, you want to market a group, and it's sort of 3 firm names, it gets confusing. But the work we did in Pueblo, Colorado was phenomenal, from our standpoint, because it was included the city and the county. It was a county, a countywide plan. And that was with the Burnham Group. And I do remember I had bought all these winter clothes, and that was when I discovered Pueblo is kind of like this place that doesn't get really cold. It doesn't get the Denver weather. It's sort of like a little oasis. And they do have snow. It's not, but they don't have the brutal stuff as much. And that gave me experience with the whole issue about farmland protection. And they never implemented, which I know a lot of people talk about the plans they do and never got implemented, but we had discovered if they just set aside like a nickel a person, a month or so, that they could fund a major conservation initiative to get easements over a lot of the ranch land out there. And it gave me exposure to people that did sustainable ranching too, and that was a very different type of experience to see that that element.
Okay. Well, let's go back to your APA presidency.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the hot topics that you were dealing with at the time?
Well, Yeah, I've never been one to sit quietly aside. And I remember you asked me who was executive director of APA, and it was Iz Stolman. Iz had been there forever, and he's pretty much very plod along, and we do what we've always done. And a good man, a brilliant man. If you ever heard him speak about architecture, it's just phenomenal. But I remember talking with him because it was time for Iz to retire. And so I ended up, one of the things during my presidency was that. And I remember Iz saying, Connie, I'm not going to die with my boots on. And I said, no, you're not, but they're going to be really worn out. And I said, so I ended up collectively getting all 21 people, because it was the commission and the board, to agree that, and we ended up finding this wonderful guy to advise us out of Colorado that Stu Meck knew as a friend, who was a management consultant. And I had the votes at the end of my first year term for termination and an exit strategy and stuff. And then I realized I would spend the next year of my presidency dealing with a new executive director. The leaving and the coming in, and I wouldn't get anything done. So I said, let's just figure out how we can get this, have a more elongated program where he can, figure out when he can retire and all. So I think, that was a lot of it. But the key thing during that, one of the things Iz told me, and as I said, it was an interesting relationship he and I had, because I thoroughly respected the man. But I found him, as far as leadership, it was time we needed new leadership. He said, Connie, I will tell you that what will be most satisfying to you will be if you will pick out one thing you want to accomplish during your presidency. That will make a difference in how you feel when you walk out of your presidency. And one of the big things that was close and dear to my heart was planning commissioners, because I did a lot of planning commissioner workshops around the U.S. and in my own state and all, and they just didn't have a voice on the board. So I felt that it was time that that APA board have a designated seat like they do for. I think they have a minority seat and they have a planning commissioner seat. It seems there's one other. I never knew, and I appointed a task force, and couldn't have had a better task force. Carol Swain was on the planning commission up in, I think, Nebraska, Bellevue, Nebraska. She looked like your grandmother. And I had this big, tall African-American preacher from Detroit, and I had this planning commissioner from Henrico County, Virginia. And what this task force did is we surveyed, planning commissioners, how long you've been on service, what are your issues, and we were dispelling the issue that planning commissioners are here now and out later, that they're very transient. The average, I think, tenure was probably 10 years, and but I never dreamed that I would have major controversy over that issue. I would think that everybody would see the need for planning commissioners to be a part of our APA board. I was so wrong. And I can remember we had a wonderful retreat during the mid-year conference in Santa Fe. And I can't remember the city we were in. It may have been Chicago back again. And we were voting on the issue. And we had a 13-member board, and I was chairing it, so I didn't vote. So, it's sort of like 7-6 or so. Well, I must have been, don't know the numbers, but I realized from the debate, we had people from the far left saying, those are just people who know, they're the status quo and they get appointed, and you know, they had no idea that really planning commissioners are probably the most representative group that you can get at times, not always. And it was getting very acrimonious. And you could hear from the debate where your votes were. And I realized, I turned to Sam Casella, who's now passed. He was former APA president, AICP president. He was one of the naysayers. Again, Dan Larber and Norm Krumholtz were leading the charge against it. And these were all these community organizer types too. And I said, Sam, do you mind taking over chair? I said, I've got, go to the ladies' room. And he said, no, don't mind at all. Well, I got up and just kind of walked far enough and sat back down and came back in. And Sam said, well, let's put it to a vote. He didn't realize he couldn't vote unless it was a tie. And I broke it to where it wasn't a tie, and he couldn't vote, and I could vote, and so I think it was something like 7-6 or something. 6, it was crazy, and but that was.
You recall who was AICP president when you were APA president?
It may have been Norm Krumholtz, okay. Or it could have been. It wouldn't have been. I don't think it was Sam, because I wouldn't have had him chair. He was incoming. Well, let's see. I was president, so he may have been past chair. He had a vote. So if I was president, he would have been, I think he was incoming, president-elect. And so he wouldn't, I think it may have been, I don't think it was, I'll have to think about that one. You have to look that one up, right?
Okay.
But one of the interesting things, I do too. I have to thank, good friend out of Portland. Put me off camera, I'll remember. But he and I actually, one of the things that we did is the AICP Commission did a budget, and they did each one, we did separate budgets, but we had like a letter from the AAPA president, a letter from AICP president, and I can't believe I can't remember his name. We decided we would have a joint letter to the membership from APA and AICP. So, because we felt that we were a collective group, and so that was a lot of that whole issue about keeping in touch and the mentoring and all. It was so important, and you asked me about my projects. I think there are two that have been significant with me in the last decade, and that has been my work in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and my work in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And Tuscaloosa was an urban renewal program, and with a huge amount of funding from Senator Shelby, that was his hometown. And the funny part about that work was the fact that I had actually been called in. A good friend of mine was planning director there, Bill Snowden. He called me in to say, Connie, I need some help. I need that. You come down here. Would you come down here and meet with myself and the city attorney, and let's talk about urban renewal, because Senator Shelby wants to do that, new federal court building, and we see an opportunity to do it. If we acquire anything, we'd have to do it through urban renewal and stuff. And I said, well, sure. Well, I knew some, but I didn't know a lot about urban renewal. So I called my mentor from 1975, who I'd worked with on and off, Gary Cooper, not the actor, who was in Birmingham. And I said, this is my charge. So he gave me all this information, and we sat down there for 2 days. I talked with them about how they should structure their program and stuff like that. And I said, the nice part about it, I can tell you what you need to do, because I'm not going to be the one. I'm not interested in the project. And I said, y'all need to hire Gary Cooper. And they said, well, great. And so I called Gary, and he says, Connie, I'd love to do it, but I'm not going to prime it. I'll do it if you'll do it. So So that was kind of how I spent the next 8 years in Tuscaloosa, Alabama as their consultant. We did an urban renewal program, we did a downtown plan, I did a study of the Strip. They had a whole issue with drinking establishments adjacent to the University of Alabama. Since I'd been doing the sex studies, we'll get to that later. They had me do the Strip study, and it was not like striptease. It was called the Strip, and I've done a payday loan program, a downtown, Main Street issue, and so, that has been significant. But it was interesting what my good friend Bill Snowden said. Connie, before you got here, Bob Ellis, the city attorney, he didn't like planners. In fact, he had no use for planners at all. And he said, he just loves you. He says, you're detailed and you do good work and stuff like that. And he says, the beneficiary, I'm the beneficiary. He says, because now he likes me because I'm a city planner, and now he likes city planners because of you. And but that was actually, Bob retired a couple years ago. Phenomenal, city attorney.
Okay, so you alluded to the sex studies. You're a national expert. Tell me how that came about.
1998, Eric Kelly calls me. He said, Connie, a good friend, the city manager in Kansas City, called him and said, I'd like you to propose on this study we want to do about regulated uses in Kansas City. Our peep shows, the video viewing booths, and those adult uses. Apparently they'd had some court issues and stuff, and I said sure, and I thought it won't matter, we won't get the job, and he says, Connie, now one of the catches is you're going to have to, part of the contract says we're going to have to visit these businesses 4 times each, and there are like 30 of them. Once during the day during the week, once at night during the week, once on the weekend during the day, and once at night during the weekend. I said sure, and I'm thinking, no way am I going to tell my husband that I am going to be in, video viewing booths, and every one of them in Kansas City. And he had actually worked for Kansas City Life Insurance Company, represented them, so we knew a little bit about Kansas City. And so I thought there was not a chance, snowball's chance. Well, Eric calls me, he says, Bob's called me, we've got the job. And I thought, it's kind of like that dog when it catches the car, what the heck are you going to do with it? I said, oh my God, now I've got to tell my husband we're going to be in these, these joints, day in and day out, because you had to be in there like from 9 to, like at 1 o'clock in the morning or so. So that was in '98 in Kansas City. And that, Eric Kelly and I have become nationally recognized sexperts. We worked in Kansas City, Toledo, Detroit, Memphis, Biloxi, done some work here for the state, and Fort Worth, and done up in Waxahachie and Denison, and a little bit of everywhere, but out in Atlanta. But and I always tell people, if you ever think, when that comprehensive planning gets a little boring, then you can always fall back on your sex studies. But it is, as someone said, I remember I was telling them about some of the apparatus that we, were having to define, and they said, I don't think I've ever heard a female say those words, And I said, well, I think it gets us a little, immune to what we're saying. But it's been a great way of dealing with something, because what's interesting is we're a little different from the standard people who, because you meet the, no disrespect, but they always call them the Bible thumpers, the people, we don't want those, well, we're kind of in the middle. We recognize there is a need for regulation, but there is also a need to understand how the industry works. And I think that's why, we did some work in Kentucky too. But one of the interesting parts was that the industry, they respect us, because we will go and visit these places. We would have, I remember the city attorney in Detroit said, that doesn't happen. Those, we have ordinances and everybody abides by those ordinances. Well, we had made sure that the planning director went with us on our site visits. She said, you are so wrong. You wouldn't believe what we saw, in those adjacent VIP rooms or spaces and stuff. So, and that
So
actually,
your book and
yeah,
it was a PAS report?
PAS report, and this is the old thing. Everything you always wanted to know about regulating sex businesses, and then Eric and I did I gave him, he did this work with about consultants, and this is where I actually found, can I say this? This is where I found that I was blacklisted. There was a person at APA didn't want me to participate in the review, and I found out this, and I remember telling the staff person, I said, I suspect I know who it is, but because I was said I didn't have experience in consulting work, and this is after 35 years, and I said, tell them they're free to call me, and I'll explain to them what I do for a living, what I've done. And shortly thereafter, I found out that I was listed as one of the reviewers. But the word was there were a lot of names given, and mine was the only one taken off as a reviewer. So, as if people don't think I'll find out. But the other was this. You talked about plans, the Midtown in Motion, a master plan for Midtown Hattiesburg, which is a HUD Sustainable Communities Challenge grant, and just finished that. And where it's a mixed-use district that we created right across from the University of Southern Mississippi and north of the hospital. But what was wonderful is having an advisory committee that really, it's like, what else can we do? It's like the Mississippi Power said, Connie, y'all talk, why don't we shoot a video? And we had a wonderful video with people, from, the students and the hospital people and the city and the neighbors and stuff participating. But I think that's when you really, there's a piece of a yin and a yang. You feel so good about what you did, but you hate that your consultant that is out of town, that you can't nurture it to continue. And because so many of these projects we all do as planners become orphans once the drumbeater leaves. And but that's been that was a wonderful project that I worked with the city and the county, and it was, this was where during the interview process I said, this is a little different. Usually I'm working with the city's money or the county's money. And I said, I know that I've got out there in the interview, there's $150,000 of private money. And I said, that's going to match. And I said, y'all are going to be watching us. And I said, that's good, because, it'll make us better. Because I said, we're consultants are as good as their clients at times. And the clients can make you better. So.
Well, let's go back to APA. You're finishing up your presidency, and by the way, did Iz retire during your term, or just
shortly thereafter? Okay. And I can't even remember. It was sort of funny how we ended up hiring a guy, Mike Barker, what may have been his name. I've lost track of I think it was, but I can remember Dan Larber, who for years had been my nemesis. We laughed because we said, that was the only time that we ever agreed on something. He and I voted not to hire him. And I think that guy lasted about a year or two or so. And then they ended up hiring Paul Farmer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So after your presidency, what other involvement have you had in APA since then? I'm sure you've probably been on a lot of task forces.
Throughout, I served on to review the, at one point, even before I was president, the testing went up to New Jersey for the AICP test. I can remember Paul Farmer wrote this long test question and had 2 questions. And I said, Paul, and that's when I discovered at that point nobody questions Paul. But I was naive and young, and I said, this is an unbelievably long, test question, and I guess because I don't read real fast, I said, and you only have 2 questions. this deserves at least 4, and well, can't do that. But anyway, so he modified it later. But I served on that. I served on, obviously nominating committees. I've been real active with the fellows a little bit. How do you that? They asked me to work with them about the creating a strategic plan, and I, because they needed, our organization needed direction, and worked with that. And I think a lot of my work has been volunteering to speak, if you will.
I know you speak a lot on ethics. Do you speak on other issues?
I do. I speak a lot on ethics, speak a lot on green development and redeveloping gray fields, which, and I always tell people, it's amazing what you should volunteer even if you don't know the subject well, because before you get up in front of the podium, you will know it or you'll be totally embarrassed. And so I do a lot in fact, I think I went down with Mike McAnally to the section there in San Antonio. And it was interesting. I was talking about how they could, the whole issue of gray fields and redeveloping these failing shopping centers in these areas, and that they need new tools for these. You don't do them under the same greenfield development standards. You have to figure it out. They said, we can't do, you can't do that. I said, no, yes, you can. You do it as an overlay, and there are ways to get around your city attorney. And remember, city and county attorneys are historically the most conservative legal minds you will ever find. So you have to recognize that, but you'll get by them, eventually. But that's why their first answer will be no. And it's just, yes, will just take a little bit longer. But I think it's real important. In fact, I always ask people when I speak, how often have y'all offered to be on a panel or something like that? Because I think it is a way of giving back, and it is a way of connecting. One of the things about connecting is I'm not sure you're on my Cooper's News Network. There's this.
Occasionally. I don't seem to be regular. But.
Well, I think at one point your email may have changed.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Okay, we'll get you back. Yeah. But this is something I started and talk about things you contribute. I remember Perry Norton out in I think he was in New Jersey and moved to Arizona, or maybe he's always in Arizona, but he's since passed away. But he talked about this thing called the internet in 1992 when I was president. And he got me to join CompuServe. And that was when it was like, you look like you're putting in data on a, NASA thing, it just the old CRT thing and all, and just nobody had a net. But I thought this was just really something we needed to learn more about. And I approached APA because I said, I saw this as a vehicle by which we internally could communicate. How small my mind was at that time. I was just thinking, it's a great way to communicate internally. And I said, I think we need a program on it. No. So I said, well, fine. So what I did is I found a room I don't know if we were in LA or wherever, and Perry and I circulated these handout about this internet stuff we were going to have. The room was full, it was flowing over and stuff, and that was part of how we got the membership interested at one time, for the first time, about the internet. And I'm kind of thinking, was it even called the internet at that time? But I from that, and I began to use this list from the chapter president's party, as a way to begin collecting emails and stuff, and so I found that was one of the best vehicles by which to keep people informed. Well, since that time, I guess really about 20 years, I've had this little group, and someone said, well, it's really the CNN. I said, what? They said Cooper News Network. And but it's ways we keep in touch when people pass away, like we just lost Phil Clark, and I think he's one of our fellows. And but I'll post that, or something someone shared, or if I need help. In fact, I'm on a task force for the mayor, thanks to Ann Bagley, the mayor appointed me to Historic Preservation Task Force. And I put out a note, I'm on this task force, what are some creative ways to, save the downtown historic buildings and stuff? And all these people share their ideas, and then I'll share it back with everyone else. So,
well, you mentioned the fellows. You want to talk about your nomination and your election?
Oh yeah, that was a real highlight. That I think I was trying to think. I think I got the Distinguished Service Award after that. So the APA presidency, the CPC chair, the APA presidency. Actually, I got the Distinguished Planner Award for the state of Alabama. And I remember my husband had to accept the award for me because I was at an APA national conference at the same time. That was when we seemed to have our conferences at the same time.
So you nominated by the chapter?
I was nominated. I was nominated by the chapter.
Okay.
And in fact, I found, I'd wondered why at one point I had not been the first class, and they mistakenly thought I didn't have the right number of years. But I like, the class of 2000 is even more significant. But I was nominated by the chapter. I'm kind of a control freak, so I thought it was, I spent a lot of time putting together my own document because, people can do it, and it's a huge lot of work for someone else to talk about what your accomplishments are. And so it was important that if I got nominated, that I put together something that our chapter would be successful at. And so it was forever though when we submitted it, and other people got noticed. This is when you got letters, and I didn't get my letter, and my best girlfriend, then I got mine, and I was in. Well, then I had to worry about Angela Harper, my dear friend, wondering if she would get in, and she did. But that was the election to the College of Fellows, to me, was truly one of the things that's just, it's validation in ways of so much of by your peers that you have, and mine was not on my consulting work, it was on my community service. And I even talked about my neighborhood activism to stop a freeway interchange next to my neighborhood, and that got us kicked out of an exclusive country club. But we were successful against the largest, one of the richest persons in Alabama, and coal miner company. But that was significant. But I would be remiss if I didn't share I talked about Gary Cooper, and one of the things that continued to bother the back end, the things you need to do and you don't do it, and you need to do it and don't. Well, Gary Cooper is 20. He's 83 now, and he was so instrumental and had done so much for planning, both in North Carolina, in Alabama, and up in Indiana. And I knew that one of the things I wanted to do is make sure he was nominated. And it was funny because he was not active in our chapter, and I had in Alabama, and so I had a lot of chapter members who weren't up in the Birmingham area, didn't even know who he was. But it was such a honor to write his nomination, that because he was so deserving. So I think some of those things, when we help people that we really know are deserving. And he was successful and I think inducted in New Orleans, and all his family was there and everything. So Gary's my mentor. The other person that has been so significant to my professionalism has been Bob Burke. Bob passed. He's up in Kirkland, Washington. He passed away about a year and a half ago, but I remember when I was CPC chair, and we were in Toronto, I think it was '86, and Bob said to me, "Connie, you should run for APA president." And it was like, "Connie, you should go to the moon someday." I said, "You have got to be kidding. Who would elect someone from Alabama, 140 people in our chapter? I know I'm on the CPC's chair, but I'm just Connie Cooper." And he said, You decide to run, I'll be there supporting you. Well, he in Denver, Colorado, during the conference, he didn't realize supporting me meant giving up his and John Keller gave up their luncheon tickets so we could go, Angela and I could go to the luncheon because we were running together, and pass out, that was when you could campaign, pass out literature while they stuffed these, we had these mailing lists, and they were stuffing these mailing lists. And then at 4 in the morning I called Bob and I said, Bob, I need you to go with me in the cab. We need to drop these off at people's hotel rooms before they leave. And he said, if I had known then that was part of my supporting you. But Bob has always been, he's just been, the person that really made a difference in my APA tenure, and he served on he was a member of the Planning Commissioner Task Force, and I think he was so instrumental in making that outcome possible. So
you've talked about some of your mentors. That goes both ways. Are there any proteges or people that you have mentored that you're particularly proud of?
I have to think. It's hard to say when I think about that. That where there are so many people that have spoken to me about, they'll come up to me, and I remember, I wish I could remember his name. He was out of New York, and he's later on when he was real successful, he said, I remember meeting you in New Orleans, and you were coming in as APA president, and you took the time to speak to me. And he said that always made a difference. The people, I'm working with Artie with Townscape, not that, I think Dennis Wilson has been a wonderful mentor for her, but I think when I have an opportunity, just showing people how they can do better,
mark up their reports for them.
As someone says, it's Bill Dahlstrom. I worked with Bill Dahlstrom on his fellows submission. I remember telling Bill, I said, Bill, I will help you, Ann and I will help you. He said, but if you don't work, I don't work. And I said, and don't send me crap. And he said, and I remember I did an article I got people to contribute about where planning is in the future, and one's the AICP president and stuff. It's hard to say when you mentor what that really is. And Paul Zucker and Lee Brown and Ben Herman, they sent me their stuff, and I redlined a lot of it, and I can remember Lee writing me. He says, I'm not real receptive of folks editing my work. He said, but you really did make it a lot better when I thought it was pretty good to begin with. So a lot of that, Kara Drain, who's on the APA board, she wanted to run someone suggested she run for the at-large position. Kara's from Mississippi, which Mississippi has less members than Alabama. And I said, well, I'll help you write your position statement. I remember we were celebrating the completion of this. They'd had a big reception for us, and that night at 11:30, wine in hand, we were writing her position statement that had to be in at midnight on the website. But and then I sent out, individually. You may have even gotten a note to vote for her, And I can remember there was a gentleman who denies that he said this, but he told Carol Barrett, he said, I can't believe the reason why I lost to Kara Drain was that Connie, she campaigned for her. And I said, I just wrote my friends and said she's the best choice. But
do you have any advice for young planners just starting out their career?
I do. I think it is very important that you do time with the public sector. I think public sector work is real important, so you understand how it looks on that side of the desk. I think consulting work, you will miss stuff, you will grow too quickly, you'll be like a pear tree that's good for 25 years or so, you'll be good for 10, your root system won't be what it needs to be. The consulting work can be very demanding, but you need a good foundation. The other thing, you need to be involved. People often say, the organization, isn't this or isn't that, and I said, the organization will be exactly what it needs to be for you if you contribute. You'll find ways that it means something. It'll be frustrating, but if planning isn't a spectator sport, and your organization shouldn't be, and don't just sit there and complain. Volunteer to speak, and I always say, even starting out with young planners, sometimes the venues aren't what they're not as broad, but volunteer at the church, volunteer at some of the schools. There's always an opportunity to be heard. And I think the other thing is work outside your comfort level. When you find you're doing, there are a lot of people and that work at the same position, not position, but the same organization for a long time. There's a reason why, and that works fine for all, but it isn't for some, but that oftentimes if you can move to locales that are doing other things, then you'll find your horizons broader, because there are a lot of jurisdictions that aren't doing much, and so it's important, and you need to make those decisions young, because life only gets more complicated the older you get. You get a husband or a wife, and you get kids, you get a mortgage, you got a house to sell, and stuff like that. But I think it's important to get involved. Most people don't. Most people, and I think I don't want to suggest it only in the public sector, but in the consulting work, I think most people sort of feel I gave at the office, sort of, and we forget to give later. And just like, I don't know if we'd be sitting here today if I'd just been, sort of, earned my living as a consultant and planning director and made no contribution. You'd say, well, what does she have to add to the storyline?
Well, you've been obviously involved in APA, but have there been other organizations that you have been involved with?
I have. I have been active in the American Society of Consulting Planners. That's it's struggling right now, and I don't know if it will continue. But I think it had a purpose, and now APA sort of made, APA wasn't doing anything for consultants, and now they're doing, they're having the RFPs online and ways of having consultants have more of a voice in APA. And I've always been active with the neighborhoods where, I belong. I've not been as active here in the Uptown, but just, among our group of neighbors, I've always been active there. I think a lot of it is just probably, if I thought about what I've done, a lot of it ties back to planning, with the people that I connect with, and try to find ways where, when we're at a conference, that we can get together and not lose our friendships, because I think when bad things happen, you need that support group, and when good things happen, you need that support group. And so I would say that probably in some ways a lot of my work has been very narrow. It's all been city planning in ways. It's been we were very active, as I said, in Birmingham. I became very much of a community activist. And right now, a lot of times I work with, Brian Klein's my fiance, and I know we're going to get married sometime. But he has an engineering firm, and a lot of times I'll bring a lot of my planning. He is actually a planning graduate from Kansas State, but he's figured out there's probably more money in engineering's bottom line. But I work with him a lot on trying to read all the codes and ordinances at all times and put together the presentations.
One of the questions we've been asking of women, and I want to say of a certain age, is gender bias. And you alluded to your experience trying to get into Georgia Tech, and you also talked about being discouraged to run for APA?
Yeah.
Any other instances?
I don't know. I wonder if that was just was that gender?
And how have you seen that change over the years?
Well, you know, I've often said I always like when someone's a blatant bigot because you see it. It's the subtle bigotry that it's hard to read, and maybe that's crudely put, but you know, I remember oftentimes people say, "Hey, little lady," you know, and I said, "What you doing, little man?" And I can remember the head of a very large publishing company came up to me after at a meeting one time and very inappropriately said, "What does your husband think about you being out late at night with all these men?" And I looked at him and I said, "What does your wife think about you being out here with me?" And I was later told that he was a big donor. I shouldn't be doing those things. But there is bias. There still remains bias. But one of the things I often said, and because I don't really, I'm almost gender blind, because sometimes I'll have to think. In fact, I remember the church that Brian's family goes to. It's Lutheran, I forget which synod it is, but they don't allow women to speak. And I realized I'd been going to church service there for about 8 years, and I realized they had the kids speak, you know, like 16 and above, and the only ones that spoke were the boys. And I realized, I said, "What is this?" And so even leaving the church, there's biases. But I found out one of the things that I think that's helped me in dealing with those biases is I always know who the quarterback is. I always know who won, who made that great goal, or you know, however, where the place. I always said, I told a good friend, where you will be shut out of the conversation is Monday morning when you go to a meeting. And first thing, you know, this is definitely stereotyping guys, but there will be conversation about the sports. You don't have to read the second page of the sports page. You just have to read the first page. And once you say a couple of things about it, it's not like they're going to ask you, but you're validate. You're one of them. And I've said that in ways has helped overcome, because I think where you'll see a lot of biases, you'll see it in hiring. You'll see it, I think even with women, they will hire an older man, but they might not hire an older woman. And in consulting work, I think it's a little more flexible at times because you're a consultant, they're hiring expertise, and but it's interesting. You can have a panel of you know, one woman and 5 guys going after a job, and nobody will think, God, look at all the guys. But if you had 1 male and 5 women during that presentation, the first thing that come to mind, God, it's all females up here. So we will always, I think we'll always be seen as females more so than, you know, people don't think this is an all-male panel, but they will think this is all, you know, they will see the females, that it's female-centric. But I've often said that part of it is you'll get it on your merit. The other is you've got to play, you know, you got to be a little bit sly. And part of that is like reading the sports page. Don't be, you know, shut out of the conversation. And as I said, you don't have to know a lot.
We've talked about a lot today. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
I would hope that our organization can figure out how to be better planners and less regulators. I continue to be painfully struck through all. I do a lot of due diligence around, well, I guess that's the other thing I do. I've done probably 500 properties around the nation on due diligence for a wealth management company, and I have to read the ordinances, and I have to deal with the planning directors and the staffs and stuff, and I can't say how appreciative I am when I get someone who can work with me, knows their ordinances, and has ordinances that make sense. And we have, it's like our building codes. We have lost the sense of planning and only see the sense of regulating. And I don't know if it'll ever change. Our tax laws have never gotten simpler, and I don't think our codes and ordinances will get simpler. But I think I would love to see the day that it got when people came in, and people often refer to people in the development side, the dark side and all. But when you walk in and the view is, how can I help you versus how can I prevent you from doing it? Let's see how we can make this work versus I'm going to make sure you know everything that you have to do that might make it not work. And so I think there is an importance that we as our profession need to figure out how we can see the other side, how we can see life from the other side of the counter, and how we can make our regulations implement our plans and be a tool versus an impediment. And so.
Well, with that, I want to thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
You've been a very good interviewer, and thank you for listening to all my war stories. But it's been a good life. I have had no regrets, and I think even those things that sometimes we think are failures, really, like we talk about the firing, if you will. I think that's certainly opened up a different dimension and we find out who our friends are too, and who our supporters are. So we've got a lot of good communities. But thank you both.
Yeah, well, thank you.